Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. I'm really happy to be here tonight. It was a really interesting conference, even though I didn't understand everything. But yeah, I'll quickly introduce myself again. My name is Carmen. I'm half of Mediengruppe Bitnik. We're a duo based in Berlin at the moment. We're originally from Switzerland, and we've been working in the field of time-based digital arts for about a bit more than 12 years. And our main artistic practice, we always say, is hacking. Hacking we see as finding a clever solution to an interesting problem. And I think it's best to introduce you to works. It kind of shows what we do best, better than me trying to theoretically explain this. I'd like to start off with a work called Opera Calling. It was actually one of our first bigger works. We did this in 2007 in Zurich, and it illustrates really well how we try to use hacking as a practice of opening something up, of looking into a black box, and kind of applying these strategies to cultural systems. For Opera Calling was a collaboration with an art space in Zurich called Gabriel Voltaire. It's an art institution recently founded at the birthplace of Dada. Dada, an art movement from the beginning of the 20th century, founded in Zurich and other cities. And we were asked to do what they called post-Dada exhibition. We didn't necessarily think ourselves to be post-Dada, but I think it kind of fit well in the end, nevertheless. We were, at the time, really interested in our local opera house. The Zurich Opera House is a very traditional house where operas are played only of people who have been dead, I would say, at least 100 years, so nothing contemporary. And for us as young internet artists who had, started out with a practice of publishing stuff online, working with networks, very, outside of the art, of the institutional art system, this opera house was really fascinating because it kind of seemed like the opposite of the internet. It was kind of complicated to get in. You had to pay money, you had to be there at a certain time, you had to sit through a performance, know which seats to buy, when to clap. There were all these kind of cultural traditions around this opera. And but nevertheless, we kind of thought, well, we have all this technology, can't we kind of update this? Can't we do something with this opera house? And we stumbled across a use of the telephone from the 19th century, right after the telephone was invented. We do this a lot. We look at how technology is used in the beginnings and kind of compare it to how it's used now. And you kind of, you see these changes, they produce gaps. And gaps are always interesting to us as artists. And this use of the telephone was put in place because at the time the radio wasn't invented. The telephone was the first technology that gave remote access to a space where people didn't have to be located physically. This was very impressive to people, and the telephone was pretty much immediately commercially used after its invention. And because companies couldn't say to people, well, buy a telephone, have one installed in your house, and then you wait for a while for somebody else to install one in the same city, and then you can call this person. That wouldn't have worked. So what they did was they just hooked up any cultural institution they had in a city to the telephone network and basically sold it as a wired radio, in a way. So people at home, you see the people at home on the left, they're standing gathered in front of their telephone loudspeaker, listening to the opera singer on the right. The opera singer has microphones placed in front of her. In the middle, that's the telephone exchange. This use of the telephone ran for quite a while in different cities, especially in Europe. There was the Théâtrophone in Paris. There was an adaptation of this in London. There was one that went, the longest running was actually in Budapest. And people loved this. People loved this remote access, this listening in to something. And we thought, well, why don't we just kind of reinstall this use of the telephone 100 years later and just not tell anyone about it? And it will be a kind of a service that nobody wanted and asked for. And of course, hooking our local opera house up to the telephone network in Zurich had the additional meaning, or at least to us locals, because culture is publicly funded in Switzerland, we were of course bringing the opera to the people who actually paid for it, the people living around Zurich. And we kind of started to research into how could we easily bug the opera, how could we get their audio feed out, and we did different technical tests, as we always do, but came up with this use. It's basically a Nokia 33-something, I can't remember, which was, people were getting rid of this phone at the time. So this was it pre-smartphone. People still had landlines. So we were calling landlines. We just fed a telephone book to a computer. And we used this telephone because we could just bulk buy it off eBay. People didn't want this phone anymore. And it had a really, really good function built into the phone, which was an auto pickup function. At the time, there were still not these the Bluetooth car speaker things, so people just placed this phone on the seat next to them in the car, and the phone would just pick up any call automatically and put it on loudspeaker. So we used these phones as bugs. Of course, cell phones are great with battery life. That was a problem for us, because we had to place these and they had to run for a while. This is what the bug looked like when it was found by the Opera House, the first bug. They showed it to Swiss national television and partly unwrapped it. This is the Zurich Opera House. So basically, we placed these telephones with their, connecting them to how do you say, to plugs, wall plugs, whenever we could, so they would have like the maximum running time. And we got a computer, we fed it the whole telephone book of the Zurich area, and we programmed the computer to randomly call people at home every time the opera played a performance. And this was the exhibition space at the Crypta in the Gabriel Voltaire. This was actually the only place you could listen to the ongoing performance if you weren't called at home. On the invitation, we did write, though, don't come to the exhibition, stay at home and wait for the call. Don't, you know, this is for home. And the telephone machine was in this space, so it's on top of the installation. I'll quickly show you a video. So we did this for 3 months, and I'm going to show you one of the calls we recorded from this time. The recording was actually an accident. For technical reasons, we had to not only bugged the opera, we also bugged people at home, because there was no way of technically knowing whether the opera feed was working for the people at home unless we also listened in. And the easiest way to do that is just to record it on a computer. So we ended up with about 4,000 telephone calls of people listening to the Zurich Opera. And after we finish a work like this, we always have the problem, how do we show it afterwards in the exhibition space? And this video is what we show now. This is how opera calling is shown.
Ja, hallo, grüezi. Hier ist das autonome Operntelefon der Stadt Zürich. Zu Ihrer Freude und Unterhaltung haben wir in der Zürcher Oper eine Wanze platziert. In wenigen Sekunden werden Sie live ins Opernhaus verbunden. Sie können bequem von Ihrem Wohnzimmer aus der heutigen Vorstellung von der Rosenkavalier von Richard Strauss beiwohnen. Viel Spaß!
Du kannst das
Opernhaus live
Hallo, was soll das? Das ist großartig. Du, ich häng da auf, ne? Ich häng da auf, was soll das Ganze? Ich will ja keine Oper. Wie? Nee, noch nicht. Ja, hier, da singt einer, wunderschön. Ja. Also hier, dann komm mal. Also die Akustik ist eine absolute Katastrophe. Aber bitte, was bringt's hier? Da hast du das.
Michael, ich muss euch die Aktion erklären. Die rufen Leute an, wählen sie aus, so per Zufallsgenerator. Das Opernhaus, das wird so stark subventioniert und nur die reichen Leute haben was davon. Und jetzt haben sie Wanzen angebracht und so kann man die Oper jetzt live, das spielt sich jetzt ab, kann man die Oper miterleben.
Gibt deine Telefonnummer?
Nee, das nicht. Das steht perfekt. Nicht alle Banken perfekt. Nicht alle Banken. Vom Opernhaus.
The opera was only half amused about the work. They first they wrote us a really harsh letter saying that if we didn't debug the opera house, they would send in the Swiss military to do it, and we would have to pay for that. And we got a lawyer, and we sent them back a letter saying, well, you know, this is art. And they kind of, then kind of had this very strange conversation through the media. Always, you know, the newspaper would go and talk to them, and we would read what they had said in the paper, and we would kind of be asked to answer, and they would read what we had said. It was very strange. But the media was on our side, and that's something that's always quite important for our work. So the media turned this into, or used it in the ongoing debate about publicly funded art, who has access to it, who owns it. At the time, there was a strong debate going on in universities in Switzerland around this topic, around research and publicly funding research, and then having the research disappear into closed libraries where they become inaccessible. So in the end, the opera let us do this for 3 months, and we really rebroadcast every opera for 3 months to the people at home, and yeah, nothing, well, we didn't get into legal trouble. We then embarked because of, I think, mostly because of this thinking of the bugging people at home, the ethics around technology always being surveillance technology to a certain extent. We embarked on a few works around surveillance, and but I'm going to skip those. But I'd like to show you a work we did in 2013, which uses slightly different strategies around hacking. We worked with surveillance at the time a lot in London, and we kind of stumbled across this place. It's the Ecuadorian embassy in London behind Harrods. This was in the summer of 2012. And Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, had fled into the Ecuadorian embassy because he feared extradition by the British to the US for leaks which had gone through WikiLeaks. I don't know if you remember the Iraq and Afghanistan leaks. At the time, it wasn't clear yet that these leaks came from Chelsea Manning. This kind of happened the year after, but the embassy or the Ecuadorian government gave Julian Assange political asylum within the Ecuadorian embassy. The UK did not recognize this asylum, or said they did not. They were harshly reprimanded for this by the UN, but still they decided to put police barrier around the embassy, basically, from August 2012 until, I can't even remember, about 3 years, I would say. So there was a very strong police presence around this embassy, a lot of surveillance tools, and this is right behind Harrods, so it's a very frequented area. You kind of walk through tourists, and then you stand in front of this house, and it's a totally different story. And I think what impressed us most was that it was a manifestation of this ongoing conflict, which usually just happens online, and is so hard to kind of place this conflict around information, freedom of information, how much information do we need to run a democracy, all these questions that kind of WikiLeaks poses, and that governments, or this government, answered like this. And we thought this was really interesting, this kind of, this war zone in a Western European capital that just was there, and was just so strange, and was just an absolute diplomatic stalemate. Nothing happened for years. And we were like, as artists, for us, the question always is, how do we intervene into situations like this that are geopolitical? They're much bigger than we are. Nobody cares what we think about this. But still, it kind of, it just really fascinated us. And we started surveilling the house, surveilling the police, surveilling the house, kind of, you know, to see what was happening. And we realized that the only normality that was still in place in this house was postal people were going in and out. And we thought that was really interesting, this kind of, okay, this postal system still works. Postal systems are still legally very strongly supported from surveillance by postal secrecy, which is also interesting because we have none of that in the digital realm. Every email can be read by every government, you know, anywhere. It's like sending a postcard, whereas mail is still, governments are still not allowed to open mail. And we thought, well, what happens if we send Julian Assange a piece of mail? Will that be delivered? Is it just other mail being delivered? We quickly realized that we need a feedback channel. We can't send him a letter. We need to send something bigger where we kind of know what's going on. So we devised this parcel with a hole in the front, and behind that hole we placed a camera. And we programmed the camera to take a picture every 15 seconds and upload it to our website. So we basically had a parcel with a live feed. It knew what was or it could tell us what was going on around it. And we addressed the parcel to Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy. We flew to London and we posted it in, here you see the address. We posted it in an East London post office. You actually see my partner holding the parcel in the little mirror, queuing up. And we thought, yeah, we'll just see what happens, whether this parcel can cross through this police barrier. And the live feed on our website was just public, so anyone could see it. We had a new Twitter, we opened a Twitter account for this work. We said on Twitter, hey, we're sending this parcel to Julian Assange. It has this camera inside, and we really wonder what's going to happen to it. And so here's you're viewing the world from the parcel now. And it was immediately placed into a red postal bag. And it stayed in this postal bag for about 6 hours. We also had GPS readings. The camera was actually a phone again. And so we kind of knew where the phone was at, sometimes at different, I mean, GPS is tricky when it's inside a box, inside a house, but we kind of knew when it was moving, and on the first evening it then turned up in this sorting office, and you just had this parcel kind of, you know, usually at hip height, being carried around these sorting offices. It went into a green bag. It came out again. I'm just going to show you a few images. This is already in the night. And we just took images from the feed once in a while, posted them to Twitter, and kind of just tried to give a location or a place or what we thought was happening. And, but people did their own performances. At this point already, this was during the night, our servers broke down because there were so many people looking at these images, and people started putting up mirrors of our server to kind of share the images. So it became this kind of, this community thing. There were other people telling their own stories through these parcel images. And the parcel kept moving. There were a lot of jokes about, you know, will we get to see where MI5 has its offices, because we will be brought there. And here already it's the next morning. It was clear we were in a delivery van on the way to the Ecuadorian embassy. This was the first street view image. This was the first time the parcel actually saw something outside. And we see all this other mail being delivered. Then the van was empty. We were really worried. We would, you know, the postal person would go like, oh no, I'm not going to deliver this. Just take it back. But then we got this image. You kind of see on the right, you see a wooden floor. And we thought, well, maybe we've already crossed this police barrier and we just didn't get any images for some reason. Maybe in this surveilled zone, you know, the internet connection from the telephone didn't work. We weren't sure. And we remained in total darkness for about 4.5 hours. And at the beginning of the work, we had sent out a letter or more like an email, which we posted publicly online to warn WikiLeaks and the Ecuadorian embassy that we were sending this parcel with the camera to them. We thought, you know, we'd give them a heads up of about 24 hours they could organize. And at this point, after about 4 hours, they wrote back, "We've received the parcel and it's with embassy security." So there we were waiting, and then we suddenly got this image, and this, and then this, and then somebody tweeted at us saying, "Oh, that's the antechamber at the Ecuadorian embassy. That's where you wait to see the ambassador." But then it was dark again right away, and we were confused, and we didn't know what was happening to this parcel. And then about half an hour later, we got these images, and this, and this. Postal art is contagious. Welcome to Ecuador. And then Julian Assange did a performance where he solidarized himself with people in similar situations to his own. Justice for Aaron Swartz. Aaron Swartz was a New York-based incredible programmer. He invented RSS. This used to be a very important protocol to read news. He had killed himself 2 weeks earlier, committed suicide because he was charged with about 3 lifetimes for stealing the research, or that was the charge, for downloading the research database from an MIT server. So for copyright infringement, and it seems he couldn't take the pressure, which is understandable. Free Bradley Manning at the time still. Chelsea Manning was in custody in a US military base. Free Nabila Rajab is a Bahraini human rights activist who is repeatedly in jail for tweets which don't conform with the king, I guess, or the state. Free Anna Carta, founder of Pirate Bay, was still imprisoned in Sweden at the time, 2013. He is free today. Free Jeremy Hammond, an American, US-American hacker, part of Anonymous, is still in jail. Free Rudolf Elmer is a Swiss whistleblower. He leaked the first offshore files, so very specifically for Switzerland, the whole tax evasion kind of leaks got, he started those. He's free today, cleared of all charges. Free Anons. Transparency for the state, privacy for the rest of us. Postal art is contagious. Thank you, Ecuador. Thank you to all our supporters. Keep fighting. 2013, we win. Julian Assange's situation has deteriorated a lot since this moment. He was arrested by British police at the Ecuadorian embassy in April this year. He's awaiting extradition to the US. The hearing will be in February. He's at the moment in a high security prison in the south of London, awaiting his trial in solitary confinement after spending 7 years confined to the Ecuadorian embassy. So it's pretty dire. That's how he ended the performance. A year later, we were or maybe I'll start differently. Julian and Sasha invited us to the Ecuadorian embassy after we did this performance together, and we got to see the other side of the police barrier. We got to walk through the police barrier, and when a year later we were asked to do an exhibition in Zurich, we decided to use this online piece as a basis. We turned the online piece into a 2-channel video installation and a very long print of all the images. And we decided to ask Julian for permission to rebuild his room at the Ecuadorian embassy, because we were really fascinated by this room. So WikiLeaks at the time was still operational. They had full access to the internet, and they actually worked from this very confined 20 square meter large room at the Ecuadorian embassy, which kind of gave us the other side to the first image I showed you from this work. It's this embassy this embassy setting, or this embassy furniture, also then overlaid by all the media and the hacking tools that WikiLeaks uses. So you have there's a lot of stories in this room, and this really motivated us to kind of rebuild it and publicly show it. So you have the TV lights and the green screen for TV TV production. You have the laptops, the servers, the internet connection. There was always a Vivian Westwood bag, because she came to visit frequently and always brought clothes. Our parcel, the original, is top left, and there's also, I mean, there's a lot of stories to tell. There's a breathing mask in the corner, which the Ecuadorian embassy provided Julian with, because for a time they thought the UK would be trying to get him out with tear gas. So this was kind of how he would be able to survive that attack and stay in the embassy. If we have time, I would quickly like to show a third work that kind of then maybe completes a bit this view on how we kind of use hacking or trickery also in our art. This is also an online performance piece. We did this a year later, which is quite interesting because in that year a lot happened on the internet. In 2013, Edward Snowden leaked a whole trove of documents documenting how the NSA surveils the citizens of the world through the internet. And this kind of led us to a research into internet subcultures and darknets, because we kind of felt that it was time to move away from the clear web, where all communication is surveilled and, you know, used for marketing purposes and used to push whatever adverts to you, and kind of look at the underbelly of the internet and kind of, or the World Wide Web, and kind of see what communities were forming there and how people were using these communities. And we curated a whole show on this topic around the darknets at the Kunsthalle St. Gallen, also in Switzerland, together with Giovanni Carmine, the curator there. And we invited 12 other artists to show works together with our work. And the work we showed was called Random Darknet Shopper. It's what you see in the image. It's actually a really easy to explain work I think we were really interested in this issue of trust. How do you trust people in anonymized networks when you don't know them and you don't have a way of building trust through a user profile or a kind of a friends relationships as you would on Facebook? How do people trust each other in anonymized networks? And for this we looked at darknet markets specifically, because a market is always a place where you need to establish trust to kind of exchange money for goods. And we became really fascinated by these markets also because they're truly globalized in the sense that you actually don't know where stuff is coming from, and the seller usually doesn't restrict where they are willing to send their goods. And because we had this issue of responsibility, we thought it would be interesting to build a non-human entity, an algorithmic entity, to go shopping in the darknets. And so we came up with the random darknet chopper, which basically is a set of scripts that goes randomly shopping in the darknets. And the goods it bought were sent directly to the exhibition space. So the outline was really basic. We had 12 weeks of exhibition time, which we divided up into 12 separate items that the random darknet shopper would buy. So once a week it would go shopping, and we just used our budget, our production budget, and gave it to the random darknet chopper. So the random darknet chopper had a budget of $100 per week, and it just went, it logged into the darknet, always on Wednesday, logged in, went to the darknet, got a listing of all the items that were there, chose one at random, gave the seller the address to send it to, and sent the money. That was basically it. The random darknet chopper is actually the computer you see hung there on the wall. So this again, I kind of mentioned it with opera calling, but I didn't tell you what the point was. So we've learned over time that it is good not to have any of the systems that may cause some friction with the law in private spaces, so we always put them in the exhibition space, where they're kind of clearly, where they clearly belong to the artwork, where that discussion doesn't arise. So the random darknet shopper was here in the exhibition space, and we basically put up 12 vitrines waiting for the goods to arrive. And the random darknet shopper, what it also did was it would cycle through what it already had bought the weeks previously, kind of you know, detailing where it had bought something from and how much it had cost. The first item it bought was a Fire Brigade master key set from the UK. The seller described this as opening utility gates and doors in the UK for the Fire Brigade in case of fire. Don't know, maybe there's a law there saying that you have to install these locks. Then it bought a 10-pack of Chesterfield Blue cigarettes. These were sent from the Ukraine, so outside of the European Union to evade the tobacco taxes. Kind of very logical darknet product. The week after, it bought a Louis Vuitton Trevi handbag from the US. This never arrived, so I don't know anything about this bag. The seller basically said that he or she was out of stock and gave the money back to the random darknet shopper. So all was, you know, very civil and trusting. The week after that, it bought the collected works of J.R.R. Tolkien as a PDF, which we duly printed. to kind of have a physical manifestation for about this was around $1 US at the time. Then it bought a Visa Platinum credit card. This came as a digital file with all the necessary numbers and names, which we put on an encrypted USB key. The week after, it bought 10 ecstasy pills from Germany, containing 120 milligrams of MDMA each. They came concealed in a DVD casing. And so all these goods had to cross the border. Switzerland is not part of the EU, so there's like a customs border for everything that goes into the country. And this actually got the customs cleared sticker on it, the green sticker. So it was actually checked by the border, which is funny. And this is the moment where the work kind of drew some international attention. Weird Internet wrote, "Abort bought illegal drugs and no one's sure what to do about it." The Guardian wrote an article on asking this question of responsibility. What happens when a software bot goes shopping in the darknet and you kind of receive goods that are illicit? Who is responsible? But of course, next Wednesday, Random Darknet Shopper went shopping again, and it bought a limited edition Nike Air GC2, I think, designed, I think, by Kanye West. They were really expensive. Like at the time, you could kind of buy them in stores. This pair cost us $100 US. Then the week after, it bought a spy cap. I don't know if you see the camera. It's in the little hole. There's a camera. Then this is actually a really nice service. It's a letterbox testing system offered on the darknet quite frequently at the time, because of course when you buy stuff that you know that may get you into trouble, you don't send it to your home usually. You kind of find a letterbox which is not used in your city and label it with a fake name. But then you have the problem that you need to train the postal services to actually put letters in that letterbox. This is the service to do that. You pay this person, I think about $50 US, and you get about a month worth of post. The letter here, the first one we got, looks like a bank statement, and then we got other letters that looked more like private letters. You know, they will vary kind of, yeah. So, and then once you're sure this mail is not being opened and it's, you know, arriving in time, and you can then, I don't know, order the drugs, I guess. Then it bought a Sprite stash can. This is just a can that, you know, when you screw on the top, it looks full, but you can hide things inside. A pair of trousers, and a Hungarian passport, scan of a Hungarian passport. Also very, very common. This is not a high-resolution scan. These types of scans are used to verify accounts that people bulk make with Facebook or other social media. So don't send your passport scans anywhere. They all land in the darknet. This is what it looked like in the vitrines. So here the whole exhibition is full. This is what's the last day of the exhibition. And then the day after we closed the exhibition, they had packed everything up, the public prosecutor came into the museum and seized the work. And we were a bit confused because we didn't really, I think the timing was just so off in our understanding that we were actually really worried. We were really in big trouble. We called our lawyer and said, hey, the public prosecutor seized the work. It's a range of goods that may be problematic. And it turned out that the public prosecution did do this for the drugs. We were actually much more worried, to be honest, about the credit card than the drugs, because the drugs, I mean, it wasn't a big amount of drugs, so yeah. And we got summoned by the public prosecutor, so we had to go to a hearing with him and our lawyer, and we prepared a whole, you know, you can imagine, we're artists, we prepared this whole set of other artists who had also worked with drugs or done stuff with drugs, taken drugs in performances, you know, since the, you can imagine, since the 1920s, and kind of wanted to convince him that this was an art piece and that the questions we were raising around responsibilities of bots and algorithms online, and also the question of, you know, when do these goods, if they are illegal, when do they become illegal? Because at least the counterfeit goods produced in China usually are legally produced. They, at some point when they're sent to Europe, they become illegal. When does that happen? How do we deal with this worldwide internet and we still have laws that kind of are confined to certain areas that may or may not make that much sense? And he wasn't that much into discussing the whole issue. He was just very specific about the drugs. He said, well, you know, as long as you were showing the drugs in the exhibition space, I was sure you weren't going to take them, but then you took them away, and you can't do that. And we couldn't convince him of the, yeah. We then, of course, tried to argue that we were taking the drugs out of the drug system. We were making them into art, and wasn't that really good? Because nobody was going to take these drugs. But he didn't want to hear it. The police destroyed the drugs in the end, but we received back all the other goods in the name of freedom of art. So we got a letter stating that the questions we were raising were interesting enough to justify this breach of laws temporarily, and that, yeah, that they were giving us everything back. He didn't want to go into this issue of bot responsibility, which would have actually been really interesting because it's still unresolved. At the time in 2014, the first self-driving cars were producing accidents, and it was a big topic of how do we deal with this legally. Because, of course, in our case, it was pretty easy to see who the people behind Random Darknet Chopper was. There was 2 people who had programmed this bot, so there wasn't much confusion of who was going to be responsible for this bot. Whereas with the self-driving car, if you, like, 5 years into development, realize that somebody right at the beginning made a mistake, which is now leading to all these accidents, how do you deal with that? Do you make that one person responsible in this team? Did this person know this? You know, how do you deal with these questions? And so I think this is why the work also received so much attention worldwide, because it kind of was a very easy to understand case study of these ongoing issues. And I think a lot of times that's what is really interesting to us, this question of how do we find how do we create thinking space around what's going on with these technologies that surround us, and how do we find the time and the mind capacity and the conversations to kind of find out how we want to deal with them in a society. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.